Hello everyone, welcome back to the 5th Division podcast. My name's James Richards and I'm joined as always by Nathan Radcliffe to go through the best 5th tier in the world. It is of course the National League and it's been an eventful couple of game weeks. We haven't had one of course because just in case you weren't aware, Queen Elizabeth II passed away. I say just in case you weren't aware because it's not been mentioned anywhere in the media at all. Very quiet. I wouldn't have known that we even had a royal family here this week, being that it's not been mentioned anywhere. But so we are back to talk football again finally. Nathan, how are you?
Good, I'd say. I'm considering, but no, not doing too bad.
If anyone hears any tapping in the background, I think there's some workmen have decided to start doing something outside my window just as we start the pod. It's very considerate of them, but there we go. Hopefully it won't last too long or interfere too much with the sound of this podcast, which is brought to you in partnership with The Big Step, who tackle gambling's relationship with football, in particular the amount of gambling adverts within football. There is an excessive amount of gambling advertising within the game, and The Big Step do great work highlighting the dangers and the damage gambling does to people's lives. You can follow them at _Big Step on Twitter. Well worth it. They're great guys and quite rightly fighting the good fight. Right, let's start then with Oldham this week, because Oldham have had a fairly eventful week. John Sheridan, the final straw, and I think it's been coming for a while actually, was a 3-0 defeat to Woking. I think it was in midweek. It seems ages ago now actually, to be honest.
Yeah.
The Tuesday games. But yeah, 3-0 defeat to Woking. And then his final game against Eastleigh this weekend was a 3-2 win before just yesterday. It was announced that ex-Everton fullback David Unsworth would be replacing him as the new manager at Latics. And I have to say, David Unsworth, a person I watched a lot, won the FA Cup, I do with December, won the FA Cup in 1995 with Everton. Really good defender, really good player. He's been coaching the Everton under-23s for an extremely long time, at least last decade, I think. Very highly thought of, and coming into this job, having rejected an approach from Oxford United, my team, in February 2018, when we sacked Pep Clotet. It looked like for a while he was going to replace him, but he didn't. He chose not to join us, waiting for the massive Latics to come in for him, I think is fair to say. Linked, of course, closely with Joe Royle, played under him, won that FA Cup under him as well as a player, and I think persuaded by just the buoyancy, the fan base, the history of the club, and also the fact that new ownership have come in and have given a pretty wide remit. Nathan, as a Latics fan, it's firstly what a servant John Sheridan has been to your club, and he goes out with, despite disappointing circumstances, he's got to go out with his head held high, given the fact he came back in to try and help you in desperate times, and he's gone out on a high with the 3 points on Saturday. But just overall, a great legend, John Sheridan.
Yeah, I mean, obviously older Oldham fans and just older perhaps football fans in general obviously remember his time at Sheffield Wednesday and some of his wonderful goals, and even later on, older fans will remember obviously his time as a player at Oldham when his
I remember him I'm sure he went to the '94 World Cup with Ireland.
Yeah, I think he might have gone to 2, but only played at 1 or something like that. But yeah, definitely played at 1, and obviously people remember that, and his
I remember
and
watching
so on,
it.
and in the mid 2000s, his knees went to Oldham, but still continued to play and got him out of trouble at times, and then obviously went on to be a manager. And people say, oh, well, he never won anything like a trophy or anything like that. But listen, the club's not won anything since bloody 1991. So having them playoff campaign and the belief, being top of the league, I think at Christmas or New Year's and so on, obviously amazing memories for people who remember that. And even just for obviously me, some of my formative years in football were under him, under his various spells, keeping us up twice back to back, and the other spell, 2017 obviously didn't go quite well, and then obviously left and Richie Wellens came in, and coming back at last season, people obviously, I think, a few Notts County fans are listening to this thinking, shares blah blah blah, but it was just one, obviously, I understand why they Notts County fans say that, but it just worked at Oldham, and obviously the circumstances at the club, he did his very best, and obviously it wasn't enough in the end. And obviously staying on this season, obviously again I think it's just one where everyone will look at it and go like he does really care, he does want it to go well. He said in his press conference after Eastleigh, like he's going to be here for the Wrexham game, he's going to be here as a fan and all that type of thing. So it's good to see he's still there, and obviously that he's basically retired now. He's had enough football because his management style just doesn't work anymore.
He's going to chill out, he said. Yeah, and in fact, David Unsworth, interesting that you talk about management styles. He came in and he said, you know what, it's changed a lot since he was a player. You can't really be harsh with footballers like they back in the day, you wouldn't get away with what they used to do back in the day. Now, just no chance. It's a different world, and he's acknowledged that. He's worked in development, for these last 10 years or so, very successfully. If you look at some of the players, maybe that haven't just made it into the first team, I think about 24 debuts have taken place under his tutelage as Everton under-23 coach. But actually, it's the players that have gone elsewhere and done quite well for other clubs. There's numerous examples. I'm now going to fail to bring up even one off the top of my head. I mean, Conor McAleny, I'm sure, was at Everton, and we loaned him to Oxford, and he was an excellent player, and he's had a good career so far. Currently at Salford, obviously you remember him well at Latics. There's been quite a few players like that who've come out of Everton and gone to have good careers in the Football League, and that's saying something, because quite a lot of academy players, when they don't make it, they just disappear. And David Unsworth has obviously prepared them well there. He comes into Latics. My initial instinct is this is a great appointment. But there are some underlying concerns, I think, because, it's a different league, a different level, a different expectation. He's been instructed to sort of build the football club from the football side from scratch, because it's not really got the infrastructure there. So sports science department, analyst department, recruitment, development. It's going to be interesting to see how he does that. Immediacy, though, is always important in football, and that will be how he gets the group he's currently got playing on the pitch. What are you expecting from him as a fan, Nathan?
I think just looking at it, it's a case of you got someone who perhaps has different ideas and sort of has a different outlook on it, on the football, obviously coming from a youth background. So I think, first of all, what I'd expect is that the youth are going to play a part. I think he said that himself. He's come through youth, worked with youth, so he's going to be able to do that a bit more, obviously, with Oldham as well. There's always going to, obviously, and I get this question, obviously, well, he's not been a first-team manager before, bar a few little caretaker spells here and there, which obviously is a concern, but I think it's one of them where you've got to look at it and think, you got someone who's hungry to make their name as a first-team manager. He says he's been waiting here and there for the job that he feels right, that will give him the best chance of that. So for him, I think it's one that he's going to really want to push on with, and obviously the relationship with, people on the board and higher up in the club, and, obviously the contact he's made at football for Everton and all that stuff, and that's going to be able to work, because they've hit the ground running in terms of they already know each other, so they know how each other works and can get on with each other, which is always good. So I think it's one where I think we're definitely going to see a positive upturn in forms. Obviously, always going to be, obviously have to have a proper look at his squad, and then, maybe, look at what he needs to change in January or so on. So, that's basically what he said, obviously, in the various interviews he's done.
Well, the good thing about the National League, I suppose, is there's no transfer window, is there?
Yeah.
So he could start straight away. But I mean, if he struggles to get results in the next 3 or 4 games, how long before you sack him? It's Oldham, after all.
No, I mean, listen, obviously, like I just said there with the transfer window and all that, obviously, while there was exactly a transfer window, obviously the fact is you just look at the sheer number of players in the squad, realistically, I think you'd look at that as an outsider and have to think, well, if you're going to bring someone in, you have to move someone else out. So that's obviously an aspect of it as well. But I'm hoping that sort of those days at Oldham are over. I mean, the last time Oldham had a manager who finished a full season was, 2013-14,
Lee Johnson.
Lee Johnson, yeah, and then he left the following season, middle of the season. So we're looking to obviously end that next season. Obviously, it would have to be now for that to come true. Just want a bit of stability and to sort of, someone who has obviously that pedigree of, obviously, like looking at Everton for so many years, and like I said, the work he's done, like, was it 26 debuts or whatever he said. So that's what we want. But obviously, listen, any manager, you want them to come in and win every single game and get promoted and win the league and win the Champions League and bloody all you play is win the Ballon d'Or and all that type of thing. But being realistic, like, come in, put his philosophy down, because obviously they've brought him in because they know what type of philosophy he wants in the football, how he wants to do it. let him instill that. So he needs a little bit of time to get that done, and then obviously then you can start looking forward to what can happen. Can you get into the playoffs? Can you get promoted? And just because you don't get promoted, but you still do well, obviously it's not been the best of starts, obviously. But obviously the Scunthorpe have a much worse one. Even if you don't get promoted, but you can still see that there's a positive going on. That's still good because you can see the right direction that could be moving on. And going into next season, if you can say, oh well, David Unsworth, he took over Oldham, he took him from this to this in a much better situation. You as a player are going to look at that. Well, where are they going to go next season? Are they going to win the playoffs?
It'll be interesting to see, won't it?
That's what players are going to look at.
Yeah, absolutely interesting to see. I wish him all the best. He's a great player, a really honest guy. And says he's going to get you a hard-working, honest squad that is going to be horrible to play against, which is what you haven't been enough of in the last few years. Yes, I mean, interesting. Obviously, the Lemsingans have left your club gutted without any sort of structural integrity for the football side in place. That's going to take a while to build up. So he does need time, and let's hope he gets it. Moving on from all things Latics, let's look at Dagenham, because Dagenham got a win on Saturday to maybe ease the pressure on manager Darryl McMahon, albeit briefly. They beat Altrincham 4-1. Altrincham, the only side still without a win in the National League this season. However, I don't really think this changes much for Darryl McMahon as it stands, because I watched the game and Altrincham could and probably should have scored at least 2 or 3 in that opening period. They had some very presentable opportunities, and it wasn't for the Daggers keeper that it could have been another poor afternoon for the team. And they were beaten comfortably midweek by Wrexham, and there was a lot of pressure building on him. I think what I'd say is that yes, it's a win, it's an important one to win, and there's some fine goals that really well taken in this game. But Nathan, in the greater scheme of things, that the underlying problems still appear to be there. Although Manny Honoree's coming back and getting a goal and offering I suppose that defensive ability he's got did help them a bit, but there's still some real underlying issues with them. Obviously, if you look at my Twitter feed, you'll see some of the data I've been putting out on them. A few of those things, albeit early doors, are still concerning.
Yeah, I mean, I think we said, obviously, I think that would be the last pod before. It's one where McMahon just seems, as these poor spells, just seems to get out of it at the last minute, like a kid doing his homework, on the school bus on the way there. Just gets out of it and sort of gets past that sort of hurdle. But the more we look on, yes, while they've won, and it's no disrespect to Altrincham, and we'll come on to Altrincham a bit more later on, it's one of them you sort of expect them to win in the form that Altrincham are in. So, a 4-1 win, it's a brilliant 4-1. It's obviously fantastic. It's perhaps not as, doesn't present Dagenham in the best light as...
Well, the XG table puts them in that quadrant of worst attack, worst defence, doesn't it? Because their expected goals per game is quite... their expected goals against per game is quite high, but their expected goals created per match is not that great, really. So, and I don't expect the last couple of games to have changed it too much, realistically. And that underlying data is always quite useful, because it doesn't tend to lie too much about where teams are. And I think they also came into the sort of languidly clinical quadrant of the attacking data, which is not a great place to be sometimes, because you want to be a team that's creating lots of chances, having lots of shots, because being clinical tends to be the first thing that deserts you, and is often not that sustainable.
Exactly, and that's the problem they've got. And just like what I was saying before, it's a question now of, like, he's done it before in terms of pulling the form around and sorting his team out. It's a case of, will he be able to do it again? And like a few Dagenham fans have been saying, is it time for him to go? A few fans have been saying that over the past year or so, or even further beyond, but he's got out of it. And like you're saying there with stats, is that while they might be clinical, it's a case of it's not sustainable. You can't keep it up for 46 games a season. It's sometimes a little bit of luck. Although going forward, obviously they do have some players who I think, obviously Paul McCallum, been there, done that, got the t-shirt for the past God knows how many years in the National League, constantly scoring goals. And obviously players like Junior Moraes, who's come in, like I said, I think he had injury problems a little bit last season. I was just trying to find his feet, but has scored some and City some this season. So they have got those players going forward, but obviously it's like you can only rely so much on them. So
I have a feeling as well, Paul McCallum will not stay beyond January. I've sources that I understand think he might be linked to Gillingham or Colchester. We'll see. But certainly not sure we'll see him long term as a Dagenham player. I mean, a chap on Twitter, well worth a follow, is Joel Page. He's a Dagenham fan, has a blog. It's a really informative read, and I think he is of the opinion, like we probably are, that this doesn't change much. They were expected to beat Altrincham. They were at home. They gave up, I still think, far too many presentable opportunities to the away side, and in the end did enough to win the game, but far from convincing. We'll have to see. We'll have to watch how this develops, because they do have some players coming back from injury, which could help them. But I always think that's a spurious excuse, and often players coming back from injury don't necessarily always hit the ground running, because it's very difficult to do that. Notts County's first defeat of the season was at Dorking, of all places. In all honesty, I do think the pitch helped Dorking best their opponents. I'm not saying that's the only reason, but it certainly did. Kind of shooting yourself in the foot is the phrase that comes to mind as well, with the goals that Notts County conceded. Sam Slocum with an absolute nightmare of a match. The first goal, he passes it into a dangerous area and is obviously outside his area when he does this, and he's caught out cold because they lose possession and McShane scores. Then he parries one into the path of McShane, who makes it his second goal, and he actually gets a hat-trick, James McShane, in this game to see off County, who did play quite well. They had to go a bit more direct than perhaps they normally would. And, interesting comments from the Dorking manager after the game, because he was saying basically their team is higgledy-piggledy put together through players coming back from injury, players who are playing with injuries, whereas Notts County have had this very settled side throughout the whole season, and it's quite a contrast. Firstly, great win for Dorking, but Nathan, the big thing now is, can we see the bounce back ability of the Magpies?
Yeah, and I think they will. I don't think it's a case with Notts County. They're a sort of little side going on a little fluky run or anything like that, who've now lost a defeat and are going to absolutely crumble. I'm very confident that Notts County will go on and continue to win games, pick up points. I don't think it's a case of now they're going to go and lose 10 in a row or anything like that. I think it's just a bit of a, as like I said, Sam Slocum has a nightmare of a game, and that second goal was like some kind of football manager glitch goal. He just goes and jumps up, and I think maybe gets a little touch in it or whatever, and then obviously McShane comes in and taps it in as he always does. I think he's, second top scorer in the league this season. He's been absolutely on fire. Maybe we'll mention him in just a second, but I think it's just a weird blip of a game. Sometimes you have, even the best teams have those weird blips of games where they just go completely, a little bit off, and like you said, the pitch obviously as well, and Sam's performance definitely played a part in the defeat. So I'm very confident they'll go on and just continue to win games and so on, if it's just a little bit of a blip. But obviously, like I said, credit to Dorking as well. I mean, obviously they've had their injury problems, like you said, put together with gaffer tape and so on. But the few games they had where they went on that little bit of a poor run of form, they were against, let's be honest, some very, very good teams. I mean, Solihull, Boreham Wood, Wrexham, lost 3-0, 4-1 and 5-0. Not the ways you want to be losing, but obviously they bounced back from that, beat Barnet 1-0, and obviously now got Notts County, beat them 3-1. So they were looking
6-point week for them, which absolutely, you're right, deserves huge credit and a big mention because of what they... I mean, like you say, that the defeats they had against those good teams, that's not going to be season defining. Winning games at home and picking up results against teams that you'd expect to be in and around the sort of lower mid-table to sort of relegation area are what will define Dorking's season for sure. Now, Notts County, of course, have a away trip to York next before they take on Altrincham at home, and then on October the 4th they take on Wrexham, which will be and that's at Meadow Lane. That'll be amazing. That'll be a really interesting and intriguing matchup. Two sides who, with managers that perhaps philosophically play quite different style of football, and one where both teams have the same ambitions though for promotion this season. So that will be one worth looking at. Dorking, like you say, 6 points in a week with a side that have either not had many minutes because they've brought them in from other clubs as reserves, and they play Scunthorpe next before taking on Dagenham and Yeovil at home. So they've got some games coming up which you think they could get some more points out of and just continue to push themselves. up the table. I mean, for them, I think get to the sort of, is it the 50-point mark? Is 50 points like National League standard? It seems to be in League 1 and 2. That's kind of always the points total. So get to that stage and then make sure you're safe afterwards. But great week for them. Interesting to see how Notts County bounced back. Chesterfield remain unbeaten. Were they fortunate to remain unbeaten, Nathan? Because I think Yeovil, certainly on the weekend, were really, really good. They played on Tuesday night with 10 men for large periods of the game, and Jeff King sizzler is all I would call it. A top shelf sizzler. That was an amazing goal from him to beat Southend, whose manager was less than pleased, it must be said, about the way that they sort of were a bit of shrinking violets. But yeah, still unbeaten, Nathan, but slightly fortunate with their performance against Yeovil.
Yeah, but you know what I'd say to that? I think it's a case of, while it might not have been the best, game where they've dominated or anything like that, it's a sign of a good team that even when you don't play well, if you have an off day, things aren't going right, they still manage to get a result, and obviously keep their unbeaten run going. A lot of other teams would have quite easily lost that game, but they picked a point, and it's one more point than other teams would have. So I think that's obviously a good sign of a team, the Chesterfield, the type of sort of, like the spirit they have. And, I think going forward as well, it's very interesting that while they have these players, obviously Shamangaru's still in and out with his injury. I think they're still sort of obviously trying to manage him well so that he, will obviously, the last thing they want to do is play him too soon and then he aggravates the injury. And obviously, Kwasi Sante, we know what he can do. He's got some good goals. Real though, if you look at the distribution of the goals, they're spread out across the whole team. I think, like Jeff King, who obviously, like I said, scored that absolutely fantastic goal. I think he got a goal against Oldham as well. The goals are all spread out. Players on 2 or 3 goals each rather than one guy who's on 8. Well, if you lose that one player who's on 8, well then you're absolutely screwed. But they've got all these players who are very interchangeable, players on the wing who can always score goals, players obviously in the midfield like your Ollie Bankses and all that, although obviously he's on a red card now. They're very interchangeable in terms of where they get the goals from. So I think that's obviously, as I say, I like that as well, in the fact that they don't rely on one player. The goals are always spread out, and so on as well. And obviously, like I said, unbeaten, which is a record that they had as well last season in terms of being the last unbeaten side in the National League. That record went to 8 games. This one has gone to 9 games as well. So
that's their best. Yeah, I looked this up. It took me a while to go through all the season, but yeah, 1935-36, I think it is their best start to a season since then.
What time were you up to last night looking at that?
No, I did it on. I knew that it was going to be 9 unbeaten if they scored a late goal against Yeovil, but I thought, they've lost this, they've messed it up, and then they go and equalise. And I quickly got on, is it 11v11, that site with all the history of...
Yeah.
And I went through all of them and I eventually found that it was, I'm pretty sure it was 1935. 36 was the last time they went 9 unbeaten to start a season. Absolutely brilliant. Tyrone Williams, still in this side. I shall say no more. And it's going to be interesting to see how whether or not Yeovil can start to see matches out. Because that's been their Achilles heel this season. They got a 1-1 draw against Eastleigh. They played really well in this game. They created lots of good chances. I think performance-wise, there's just nothing else they can do but defend corners better. I mean, that's the thing. They switched off at the corner, 3 minutes to go, and they come away with a point when they really should have had all 3. Gimme Toure is a great player on his day. He should be playing, if he could do what he does more consistently. And he did show it initially when he went to Carlisle. Then he'd be in the EFL, but he's not, because he doesn't have the consistent performances that he needs to do that. But he's a great signing, and on his day will do some pretty important play and be creative, get in and amongst players and create chances. He scored a nice goal in this one. Record has been a fantastic signing. Frankly, he's been one of the most consistent players. I think Lawson Dath being back in the team will make a difference. Worthington as well played well in midfield. So they've got some good players in there. They just need to learn to see things out. And they haven't done that yet this season, but a much improved performance. And I think if we continue to see that kind of effort, then eventually they will start picking up more points and move away from the drop zone, which is precariously close to where they are at the moment, only outside it on goal difference, albeit 9 games in, but much better from Yeovil for sure. One team that has not covered themselves in glory generally this season, although they did pick up a couple of important results more recently, has been Halifax, the Shaman. Nathan, they were on BT Sport, and they humiliated themselves, frankly. I can't be kind to them. It was an awful, awful performance. A 5-1 defeat at Aldershot, who deserve a lot of credit. Aldershot were very, very good, but I have to say as well, Halifax made it so easy for them. They didn't fight. They lost the second balls nearly every time. There was a lack of effort. There were mistakes all over the place. There was no direction to their play. And after going 3 unbeaten, they've kind of thudded themselves back down to earth with an almighty bump here, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, I mean, following that Notts County 4-1 defeat, which to be fair, you don't want to lose 4-1, but I don't think you could lose too much heart over that.
I didn't think they were actually that bad in that game, actually, to be fair.
Yeah, exactly. You can't lose. It's Notts County, the firepower they have, and it probably wasn't a 4-1 defeat performance. They had Scunthorpe, Maidenhead, Gateshead. They beat Scunthorpe 2-0. Now you can say, yes, Scunthorpe the form they're in, that's almost a given. But listen, you still got to go out and do it and not be too cocky in that way and think you've won before the ball's been kicked. A draw away at Maidenhead, and then a win against Gateshead. So you look at that and think, that's a good, decent little thing against some teams who are in and around some extent where you are in the table. Look at the Aldershot game and think, this is another good chance. Get a draw maybe. Away from home, get a draw and just keep that sort of thing running. Going on to Eastleigh away and then Woking. But no, they didn't do that, and it's been an absolute 5-1 demolition. And Aldershot, I think, to be fair, we had them, I think, down there. Maybe did you have them bottom of the table in our predictions, or at least down there? I think they had.
I think we had them staying up. I'm not sure.
Just staying up. Okay, but we had them down there. I think they have exceeded expectations a little bit in some of the performances that they've done. They have shown sometimes, that they've got something about them. Sometimes they've shown they haven't got something about them. It's a little bit inconsistent, but this has been one where they've just been on the game really and exploited Halifax, who just didn't really seem to want it, and
they were dreadful. They were dreadful. There's no way.
Dreadful, yeah.
Can't dress it up. I mean, they were wearing. I thought their yellow kit looked better actually when they're wearing it than I expected it to when I saw it pre-season. Not that kit makes any difference at all, but they were so poor. And they got themselves back in the game. In fairness, they got themselves level after going behind, but they only were in front for a very brief spell. They were only level for a very brief spell. I think about 3 minutes before Aldershot regained the lead and then went in at half-time 2-1 up. And they just didn't react. Chris Millington must be so disappointed with that second half performance. They were dreadful. They didn't react. They didn't play well. Is it Ifeanora who plays that? No, it's not Honora. Is it Effiong who plays up front for?
Effiong, yeah.
Yeah, I thought he was completely dominant, and they just had no answer to it. And maybe that's what Halifax lack, a big centre forward that they can play off, because they just didn't keep the ball in the opponent's final third at all. And the data is not flattering to them either, actually. And we will look at the data regularly as it comes available. And I'll keep putting out some of these sort of charts, but they just were so poor. And I'd be interested to hear from Halifax fans about what they think about their start to the season, whether this one result is concerning or it's just a bad day at the office after 3 better performances. We'll see. I mean, I do want to touch on Altrincham as well. We did mention they lost to Dagenham, but they're still without a win. And, they should have probably beaten Scunthorpe midweek and they didn't. What are your thoughts on Altrincham, Nathan? Because, the longer they go without a win, they want to get this monkey off their back, don't they? Because it is a bad record to be the only team in a division as you approach the 10th game without getting a 3-point haul at all.
Yeah, I think realistically Altrincham under Phil Parkinson, this is their third season now back in the National League following a back-to-back promotion. I think as an outsider, perhaps someone who doesn't know an awful lot, you could be forgiven for looking at that thinking, well, that's Altrincham. They've always been absolutely rubbish and never really done anything worth the time in the National League. Be forgiven for thinking that. We've actually had a look at it. They have had points where they've been very, very good over the past 2 seasons. They had a very, very good spell. I mean, the first season, the 2021, they had a very similar poor start, but then went on a very, very good run, which saw them in the playoffs at Christmas. Okay, they didn't keep it up and finish mid-table, but it still showed that they had that ability to go on and do that. And then last season they had it was a complete opposite to what they've had this season, where after 9 games I think they had about 18 points or whatever, and just outside the playoffs. But now they sit bottom of the league, 5 points from 9 without a win, and it's not looking good, especially considering the fact that this is meant to be their big season, transferring from part-time football to full-time. But they just haven't been able to sort of show anything from that. Now we did think it might take them a little bit of time to adjust to that, but those adjustments have got to start to happen quick, because otherwise they could very well be in trouble. Not only just obviously on the pitch, but financially. If you've made that commitment to switch to full-time football and then you get relegated back into the National League North, then that's a big problem, and all that money you've spent making that transition, you're going to have to either bite the bullet and keep full-time, which I don't think is financially possible, or go back to part-time, which obviously you've then made a step backwards. So it's something that needs sorting quickly.
In terms of like the data, the shots per game, they're actually above average for shots per match. Obviously the data that I put out was a couple of game weeks ago, so it might have changed a bit since then. But in terms of like compared to the rest of the division, they're doing okay in that regard, but they're just a little bit ineffectual in terms of their finishing. They're not clinical. They waste some good opportunities, and that's really bit them. And they conceded poor goals at poor times as well, which hasn't helped. But like you say, I think we had them, I think, mid-table, maybe top half in our predictions, or maybe not quite that high. But I do think they could turn this around. And like you say, they had a poor start a couple of seasons ago, and they went on this good run. Maybe we are still at a stage that's too early to tell. But I always look at it at 10 games and start to worry, because I think after 10 games, that's a fairly good cross section of the season to sort of start looking at trends. And at the moment, they're trending poorly. Southend, one of the teams that are absolutely in the energetically wasteful column. They are in a league of their own when it comes to that, and you can see why, because Dan Mooney and Callum Powell have missed many opportunities. Though I think, is it Daggers they signed coming in on loan from Salford? I think he could be an important addition, because he looks big, strong, but not bad with his feet either. And they played Wrexham, and there was a big controversial moment. I think it was Jake Hyde scoring a goal. It looked like it was fine, no issues with it, and then all of a sudden, some complaints from the Wrexham players, and it was disallowed for offside. Nonsense, frankly.
Yeah.
Nowhere, he was not offside. What has happened here is that it probably did bounce up and hit. Who was it who hit on the arm?
Ralph.
Yeah, so it might have hit Ralph on the arm, and they've missed it. And to save their skin, they've made up. They found a ghost offside decision to call the goal, or to disallow the goal, which is absolutely terrible officiating. If you miss it and you're not sure, you don't make up another reason to disallow it. You just hold your hands up and say, well, we made a mistake, we missed that. And the handball was clearly, if it was indeed handball, was not deliberate. I mean, it's just utter nonsense officiating, and you can see why there's such a lot of frustrating at officials sometimes at this level, because that was terrible.
Yeah, it was. Just looking at it, I mean, I sort of prefer. I'm looking back at the highlights. You've obviously got the main highlight, but then there's a fellow, I think, who was doing like a vlog or something, so got an angle behind the goal. You'd be forgiven for missing the handball at first, because it was a very weird one, whereas obviously Ralph's leg is also going up, so you might thought, oh, he's got his foot on it. But yeah, it does hit his hand. Whether he meant it or not, obviously that doesn't really matter in the rules, but in the spirit of it, whether he meant it or not, I don't think he did. But he then knocks it on, and then Hobson sort of shields the ball but doesn't touch it, and then Hyde sort of turns, smashes it into the goal, and obviously thinks he's scored over Southend players run off. But then you look at it, and it's like, yeah, Max Cleworth, who has been quite good for Wrexham this season, highly rated youngster. He's playing him on side, obviously. So this whole thing of it wasn't offside. Listen, if they want to disallow it for a handball, fair enough. You're very, very obviously, a fantastic case for that, obviously, because it did hit his hand. But this phantom offside, where it's come from, and this is the thing as well. Maybe this type of technology or this way of doing things wouldn't work at the National League, but I think it's obviously a case that other sports do, is where the referee will explain why they've done what they've done, and this is why. So it sort of. I'm an absolutely big advocate for that change, where referees are either mic'd up, like in rugby, though I think, you look at the respect players have for officials in rugby, and that's you have to admire that. There is a much bigger respect from players
for officials in rugby, and that's embedded in the sport all the way down to youth level, and that's what football needs. But that's going to take time to trickle through. You're not going to get that overnight. But yeah, certainly explanations as to why they've given decisions, because paying punters deserve that, because we're being fleeced right now. That was a terrible decision. The linesman didn't give offside at all when the goal went in. He had to think about it and then make it up afterwards. And frankly, that just creates this atmosphere of, I don't know. I mean, it's just despair amongst the fans when you see
distrust.
that. Oh, distrust, despair. Yeah. Like they can't trust them to crack an egg, let alone bloody officiate an important match for these teams. On Southend, though, I mean, back-to-back games against Chesterfield and Wrexham, they've given two of the best teams in this division a really good game, and that's a very positive sign. Marcus Daggers, like I said, looks like a really good signing who could help them out, especially in a time when they've really lacked any punch up front. And there are some positive signs for Southend in the data as well. They just need to be more clinical, and if they start being more clinical, then they're going to pick up points and start pushing up the table, because I think overall their performances in their squad are better than what they've shown perhaps so far this season. And I really like what Kevin Mayer is trying to do. But, when you sit in 17th or whatever they are at the moment with only 9 points from your first 9 games, you could be forgiven for thinking that things are a lot worse than they actually are. Things being a lot worse than they actually are, Scunthorpe United, real mess of a situation, and I really do feel for their fan base, because there was a report in the Grimsby Telegraph that said if the takeover that they were trying to get through collapses, then the club could go into administration. It subsequently did collapse, and Peter Swan was asked about administration, and he's been very coy on making sure he doesn't answer it. I mean, Phil Turnbull, I think it is, the CEO there, did come out and say that the chairman will support the club through this, but it's a mess, on the pitch, off the pitch. I don't know, Nathan. It's basically the antithesis. They need what's happened at Oldham to happen here pretty quickly in terms of new ownership and new buzz about the place, because it's just, I can only see it going one way at the moment, and it's not a direction that they will be looking to travel in, unfortunately.
No, I mean, I think we said this at the start of the season, we've said this in previous pods, but with Scunthorpe, it's a club where I remember them when they were pushing up for the championship. They're always up there, in and around the playoffs, sometimes top of the league, in League One, for at least a good 3 seasons straight, maybe even a little bit more than 3 seasons. But then it's just collapsed, I think, after, it was the 18-19 season, I think, but just things after that where things just went absolutely awful, and since then they've had a 23rd place finish, a 20th place finish, a 22nd place finish, and a 24th place finish. And now they sit 23rd in the National League, and a takeovers are needed. Now, obviously clubs will come down, usually for a club of obviously Scunthorpe side getting relegated from League 2. It's usually because it's not just a case of on the pitch, although obviously on the pitch is obviously what's got you relegated. It's something above that, the owners, the management, people running the club. It's got so bad that they've strayed well outside of their sort of comfort zone, the zone that they normally bounce around, to the fact they've been relegated from the Football League. But a takeover happens, and it sorts the club out, rejigs it, and they might not go up straight away, but at least they stay comfortable and then can push on for a promotion. But that needs to start as early as possible, because the longer you leave it, the more chance you have of going down into the National League North or National League South, depending on where you're based. And then once you're in there, that's an absolute nightmare to get out of. Just look at like York and stuff like that. They've only just got back out this season. So the last thing going at some point want to do is become a York, because then it turns a 3 or 4 year project into perhaps even like a 7, 8 or 9 year project.
Yeah, long time.
The Football League. So, obviously the club as well financially positions having to be cut and merged together and stuck together with sticky tape, something which is not always a thing that never goes well when you have to do that, because you pay, the workforce that you can put out on and off the field, you're getting less of a return, which generates less money. It puts more stress on people, which is never builds a good little atmosphere amongst the staff and amongst everyone around the club. It's never good, that. So they need a takeover. It needs to happen. Like I said, there was that takeover that was rumoured to be happening. There was negotiations going on. That, obviously, according to Swan, now has collapsed. Administration is obviously being floated around, which it always will be, when obviously, like I said, I think there was something last season that Maguire put out about the amount of losses that they're making a week, which again is never
about
good as well.
30,000 a week, isn't it?
I think it was about 30,000, 40,000 a week, and if a club, if you're looking to buy a club, well, okay, 30,000, 40,000 a week. Obviously those become player contracts and so on. You've got to meet that, and do you want to meet that? Is that something you're willing to make, as well as buying the club, as well as investing in the stadium, which is falling apart, let's be honest. And when it's falling apart, that limits what you can do in terms of generating more revenue. So it just needs a complete change top to bottom. But the important thing for Scunthorpe is this: do not get relegated. They just need to stay up. That's all they need to do. They just need to do absolutely everything they can to stay up. Just get 20th. Don't care.
They haven't appointed a new manager yet, have they?
Yeah, and that's just what I was about to go on to as well. So friend of the show, Toby, when I was speaking to him, he's of the opinion that basically it'll be Tony Dawes, his interim manager or caretaker manager, whatever you want to call him, and that they just do not have the budget to appoint a manager. And even if they did, why would that manager want to come? Because they wouldn't then have any further money to spend on players.
And also, if new ownership come in, would they want him? And
yeah, that's it exactly. So they need to take over sooner rather than later. Just stay in the National League. You might have 2 or 3 rubbish seasons in the National League, but as long as you stay up, finish 20th on bloody head-to-head, I don't know, or bloody yellow cards, however, just stay in the National League. Someone could take you over, perhaps even take you over this season. Remains to be seen how quickly a takeover can get done, and then they can rebuild from there, and perhaps in 3 or 4 years' time we could see them back in League 2, which is where they belong, and obviously then further on from that, back in League 2, back in League 1 even, which is what I remember Scunthorpe being.
Yeah, I think we have a ways to go before that happens, and I think at the moment it's just a case of keep the club alive, and even staying up might be a tall order. It really might be. Anyway, in terms of the other games, let's have a quick roundup of the rest, because it was a good 4-point week for Boreham Wood. They got a point midweek, and then they got a win midweek, and then they drew with Gateshead. Gateshead struggling still. The football, the data of Gateshead is actually quite encouraging, but performance-wise, not so good. Maidstone, they went to Bromley and showed just why they have conceded so many goals away from home. They're just terrible at defending, but their attack is actually not too bad. Bromley are a good side, though, losing to York in midweek and then a 3-0 win at home. I'm a big fan of Bromley. I think they've got some great young players, really good talent in attack, and just generally speaking, a really good side. Barnet, they were disappointed to lose in a poor performance at home to Dorking, but then they went to Solihull and got a point in a game which they probably should have won, actually. They played really well, second half especially, pretty dominant. Ryan de Havilland deserves credit for his performance. I thought they were excellent. And going to Solihull and getting a point is something that I don't think many sides are going to be able to do this season. So that is, and I think I mentioned it on Twitter, not something to be sniffed at. I mean, Solihull thrashing Torquay 4-1 in midweek before that. So they've had a 4-point week, which keeps them in touch. Torquay, that defeat and a 1-1 draw with Wealdstone. Wealdstone, of course, 1-1 draws back to back. And Maidenhead, Woking thrashed Oldham, and then go and lose 1-0 to Maidenhead, and that's kind of what Woking are at the moment. A bit here, a bit there. Maidenhead, I think, have been actually pretty competitive and could deserve a lot of credit for how they've played this season, because they lost narrowly at Boreham Wood on Tuesday, and then they beat Woking, and that kind of shows they're not a side that are going to roll over for anyone. They've got some really decent players in that side, and as long as they keep winning at home, they shall be fine. Eastleigh, obviously, only 1 point this week. They drew with Yeovil and then lost in late fashion to is it Charlie Wellens?
Charlie Wellens, yeah.
Charlie Wellens, who is this right? There was a stat talked about where is he the first player to play under a manager and score for a club that his father also played under the same manager and scored for the club? Is that
it took my head a little bit to get around that, but I think I know what you're saying now.
So Richie Wellens played under John Sheridan and scored for Oldham, and now Charlie Wellens playing for the same club, Oldham Athletic, under the same manager as his dad, also scoring for the club. I don't know if that's happened before. I don't know. To
be honest, it's probably something like that. It's quite a few at Oldham, quite a few bloody fathers and sons and so on. Sons of sort of former players. Too many to list at the moment, but To be honest, I don't know if there's a way to confirm that, but it's so mad that I think probably
It's it's to get your head around. It makes me
Yeah.
feel old, actually. Well, I am old. Let's be honest, but
yeah, I'm not yet.
you're not yet. You're not yet. Anything else to add before we round this up, Nathan?
Yeah, so Adam Marriott's 2 goals against Maidstone were his 3rd and 4th of the season. They'll be looking to beat a tally of 17 from last season at Barnet. Justin Amelzova and Ini Effiong picked up both their 4th goals of the season in that 5-1 demolition of Halifax. This is Altrincham's worst start to a season since 2016-17, when they picked up 4 points from the first 9 games. It was 4 draws, very similar to this 5 draws in the National League North, and they went on to finish bottom that season, getting relegated to the Northern Premier League. 4th draw in a row for Wellstone, obviously. The good start they had, but now 4 draws, which is, you could have lost some of them, but also you wanted to win some of them, so not the end of the world for them. They'll be looking to obviously pick up some wins and keep their position at the top of the table. York unbeaten in 5 since losing to Eastleigh, and only 2 of the top half won, which is quite interesting as well. If you look at the current top half, only 2 of them won, obviously giving a bit of potential for teams lower down, obviously climb up the table.
Yeah, well, interesting stats there, Nathan. Thank you very much for that, and I do enjoy your what you pick up and what you find to talk about at the end of the pod. I think the fact that, like you say, only 2 teams in the top half won shows that this is still a wide open division. I think we know who the top 4 teams are, but they're not unbeatable apart from Chesterfield so far. But they were fortunate, and I think Paul Cook was quite honest with Chris Hargreaves after that game, saying, you didn't get what you deserve, and it's good that he's honest and can talk like that. But yeah, really, really interesting. We come to the 10-game review, which will be probably our next episode. I look forward to that. Always like sort of looking back at the first 10 games of a season, and we'll pick out some things from it all and report back to you next week. Nathan, thank you for your opinions as always.
Yeah, that's no problem.
Please share this podcast, subscribe to it wherever you find them, give it a retweet on Twitter and spread the word, as we are still a fairly young venture. But yeah, thank you for all those who do listen, who get in touch with us, give their opinions. We love chatting to you guys on Twitter. You can find us on our personal accounts, or definitely follow us at DeFi Football. Absolutely, that's a given.
Yeah, given that.
And we'll see you again real soon. Take care.